Coming up on Shoppers Politics.
Okay, now say it like you want to be here. One more time. 1, 2, 3!
Coming up on Shoppers Politics.
I want the Prime Minister to carry on being Prime Minister well past my 70th birthday. It's about time we had somebody overtake Walpole's record.
What was that record again?
21.
Yeah, was that children or age?
Age.
Thank you.
Length of time in office.
I'm Christopher Hope, the Chief Political Correspondent of the Telegraph, and this is Choppers Politics. Well, the party season is well underway, and Westminster political journalists like me are back from Brighton ahead of another journey north to Manchester next week. But for us journalists, well, we're all the same, aren't we? We ask all the same questions. We're pretty boring people, really. It's our job to find questions, but we've asked them all before. But I thought, let's get some young people into this podcast this week. So I've asked the great students here from St George's School, Harpenden, to grill, well, a senior politician another day. And who better to get down with children, not with kids. They're small goats, aren't they, Jacob Rees-Mogg? Oh, I've given away. Yes, our guest today is Jacob Rees-Mogg. Jacob, welcome to the Red Lion Pub.
Thank you very much. I thought you might be auditioning to take over from Jeremy Vine. But,
Jacob, how is the government doing?
Government's doing well in difficult circumstances, yes. If you go back to 2019, when the government had no majority, it has managed to get from there to a position where Brexit has been delivered. We have come through the bulk of COVID. That's not to say that it has all ended. And we are dealing with the problems that have come globally, as it happens, in supply chains. And that is taking a bit of time as things normalise. Big increase in normalisation today with the end of the furlough scheme, which is thought to have kept 2 million people in employment. You know, that is really important. The vaccine
We're all paying for that, Jacob, aren't we?
We are.
These children, they're on their future taxes are paying for it.
Yes, £68 billion. But it is money, in my view, very well spent, because what was so important in March of last year was to maintain the structures of the economy. And what you see in the supply chain difficulties is where the structures of the economy have been damaged and need to be rebuilt. But what furlough did is maintain the bulk of the structures of the economy so that as it reopens, it can reopen in a non-inflationary way. And that's been fundamentally important. So that £68 billion means that the economy will be potentially back to where it was before COVID this quarter, in the third quarter, and that will more than save £68 billion in the long term against the cost. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, because all bills have to be paid eventually, and borrowing falls on the young rather than on the old, ultimately, but that the borrowing would have been even higher, or the economy would have been even smaller if it hadn't been for furlough.
So the government's blameless. Is it the fact that nurses can't get to hospitals because of the fuel crisis? That's not the government's fault.
The problems that we are seeing in the supply chain have come about because of COVID. If you look at the average number of HGV drivers tested each year, it has been 30,000. We had a year when there weren't any tests, for the obvious reason that you were sitting in a cab next to people. So testing stopped. The government has taken steps so that now testing has restarted. There will be 50,000 tests a year, so a significant increase. But that 89% of HGV drivers, of lorry drivers, are UK nationals. So it is a UK issue where UK testing didn't take place because of COVID, which is now beginning to normalise, actually with an increase in the amount of testing. As regards the fuel issue, all systems depend on demand remaining at a level state. And we saw that with the buying of loo roll last year. That when everybody decides that they will fill their cupboards with loo roll, you shift the inventory from the warehouse via the supermarket to people's home. What's been happening over the last few days is a shift of inventory, of which there is plenty, from the petrol and diesel depots via the pinch point of the petrol stations into people's cars. So there hasn't been a massive surge in the use of petrol. It has just moved from being stored in the refineries or the depots from which it's delivered to being stored in people's cars. Amazingly, most people normally only have a quarter of a tank full of petrol. If that switches to being a full tank of petrol, the surge in demand is quite extraordinary, and no supply chain would be able to deal with that, regardless of the number of lorry drivers that you had.
Has your Bentley run out of petrol?
I haven't actually used it in the last
You
week.
haven't, no.
I mean, I always need to fill up with petrol because having constituency in Somerset, I need a full tank of petrol to get there and back. I think I've got enough to get home.
Yes.
I haven't got enough to get to Manchester.
No, I did pack a jerry can in Mrs Hope's pink convertible last week. Felt I had to, really.
Did you really?
Yeah, I put a jerry can in the car. That shows a degree of panic, doesn't it?
No, it shows that having seen
Foresight.
what is going on, you're being cautious. And this is the very interesting thing about behaviour. What is rational for people individually, collectively can be difficult for the country as a whole. So what you did for you was rational, but exacerbated the problem for the country at large.
When you first came on this podcast, and you've been on several times, this was called Chopper's Brexit podcast.
Know,
it's
which
not
was
anymore.
Much harder to say, actually. I had to say it several times before. You did it twice, and he was happy. When I said Chopper's Brexit podcast, he made me do it half a dozen times.
Well, you kept saying breakfast all the time. But Brexit, you haven't mentioned Brexit. Critics say it's a Brexit issue. Would you accept even a small amount of EU drivers going home has caused this crisis to a degree?
I'd already answered that. 89% of the drivers are British. There are 6 million EU member state nationals who applied for settled status. Now, are you really saying that the 11% of HGV drivers who had non-UK passports have all gone at once, aren't part of the 6 million who applied for settled status? And why is it that there's a bigger shortage of HGV drivers in Poland, which hasn't Brexited currently, which is a bigger shortage than there is in the UK? Okay. So no, I think this is the people who moan a lot and blame everything on Brexit. Why was the last Test match cancelled at Old Trafford? It's probably Brexit, wasn't it? I mean, no, everything becomes Brexit. That's just the stuff you get from the left.
Okay. You're a man of precision and what words mean. What is levelling up?
What is levelling up? Levelling up is making sure that people across the country have the opportunities that are available in the best off parts of the country. Yeah. And I see this very clearly in my own constituency, because in a strange way, North East Somerset is a microcosm of what we've been seeing with the Conservative gains across the country, because it is an area of historic coal mining. And most people forget that Somerset used to have coal mining, but the area that was coal mining is predominantly in my constituency of North East Somerset. And some of those areas have been depressed for some years, but have been improving recently because of redevelopment, because of some house building, because of the rollout of super fast broadband, because of a very significant improvement in the education college. Yes. So providing people with a better chance to get on, encouraging people to be
but
more
people don't
ambitious.
think of Somerset when they think of levelling up. They think
no,
of
they don't, but
northern seats in northern England, don't they?
That's right, but I also have in my constituency some areas which essentially commute into Bristol where you've got people with enormous wealth. I mean, you've got a small smattering of multimillionaires commuting into Bristol, and you've then got this area of historic deprivation. That's why I say it's a microcosm of the country at large. And you can see how policy has helped those areas that were left behind pick up. So it's about how the planning system interacts with the infrastructure, how the education system gives people a second chance. There is the skills bill working its way through Parliament at the moment, which will give a lifelong learning entitlement so that people who have been let down in their education will have a second chance. So levelling up is about all these things to ensure that there is opportunity across the country.
Yeah. Where are the Tories, do you think, at the moment in raising taxes? I mean, the Tory party should be the party of low tax, but it just isn't, is it, with this increase in national insurance next April? The
Conservative Party has always been the party of low taxation and sound money, and sometimes there is a tension between the two.
And it's pushing taxes up against its manifesto commitment.
But you complained a moment ago about all the borrowing. You can't have it both ways. Which do you want?
Do you accept this then?
Do you accept Ricardian equivalence?
Don't ask me questions.
I like asking you questions. I want to find out if you accept Ricardian equivalence.
Do you accept that you need to break in a manifesto? Because you did tweet, didn't you? Or you put a quote into the Sunday Express, which became a big story when you quoted, "Read my lips, no new taxes," which is what Boris Johnson said in 2019. And now, guess what? Taxes are going up.
I'm delighted that people pay such close attention to my words of wisdom in the Sunday Express, which I've been doing every week for a long time. And that one attracted a certain amount of interest. Ricardian equivalence is the point that borrowing, because it is future taxation has the same consequence as an increase in taxation, and that therefore there is remarkably little difference between the two.
Right.
And I think that's particularly important to the audience that will be paying the taxes that fund the borrowing in future. Whether we borrow now or tax now has remarkably little difference in terms of effect on the people who will end up paying for it, whether they pay in tax now or they pay in tax later. And the economic effect is also, if Ricardian equivalence is correct, thought to be similar because voters, taxpayers are rational, and they make choices knowing...
Do you think voters get the issue of... what do you call it?
Ricardian equivalence.
Do you think voters get the idea of Ricardian equivalence? Will that cut through at the election?
In North East Somerset, they talk about nothing else.
Because it's these students here are brilliant political students. They know what you're talking about, Jacob Rees-Mogg. But does the man in the street know what you're talking about? And will they understand why the Tories have had to break a key part of being a Conservative?
The key to Ricardian equivalence is people act upon it, even if they don't use the term.
Is Boris Johnson a Conservative?
Well, of course he is.
It's been questioned. I mean, he's not a low-tax Tory.
Next, you're going to ask me if the Holy Father is a Catholic. Is the Queen the leading member of the House of Windsor? I mean, what other...
It's been questioned.
Is the Telegraph Conservative?
The Telegraph is a newspaper, as you know. Did you ever think about resigning over the national insurance increase?
I'm a great supporter of the PM. You know,
you started a rumour, didn't you? Because you left your phone in the Cabinet office.
That was quite funny. Immediately after the Cabinet that agreed to the tax rise, I went off to a separate meeting in the Chief Whip's office. As I was leaving it, I realised I didn't have my telephone, so I had to go back into Downing Street, but via the back route, and then came out the front door half an hour or so after everyone else left. By the time I got back to my office, I was being told that Sky or somebody had noticed this and thought I must have been arguing the toss. Not a bit. I had just left my telephone behind. So it's always fun to find that stories without legs get legs.
Yes, that's our job sometimes. But on green taxes, where are you on green taxes and loading up bills with David Cameron called it green crap back in the day, didn't he?
Well, I'm rather surprised you use such
I'm
language in the audience
students.
of this distinction. The issue with environmentalism is that we have to achieve what we have achieved since 1990, which is 78% economic growth with a 44% cut in emissions to make us the biggest cutter of emissions of the G7 and so on and so forth. What it's all about, and what all politics is about in my view, is in Disraeli's terms improving the condition of the people. Our job is to make people's lives better. Now, we don't do that ourselves, we just create the conditions where people can do it for themselves, businesses and individuals. That means that if we are going to have carbon neutrality in net zero in 2050, we need to have the technology that allows people to be green as well as prosperous. I don't think voters will go for green and not prosperous. I don't think they want the hair shirt, the Caroline Lucas approach. But this is where I think the Prime Minister is absolutely with voters, because he is embracing the technological approach. And I think the most exciting part of this is potentially hydrogen, because hydrogen at use is a completely clean fuel. And you can use renewable electricity when it's not being needed by the grid. So in the middle of the night, you can use it to create the hydrogen, green rather than blue hydrogen if you prefer, and that then becomes effectively the battery without the rare earth metals and the lithium and so on that the batteries require. So I think hydrogen is the really exciting technological question, along with nuclear fusion, which...
These are a long way away. Is now the right time to do these things, given the cost of living issues coming this autumn?
We've got
winter?
30 years to achieve net zero. It's not tomorrow. And I think you have to ensure that it is done in a way that improves people's standard of living. And what's really exciting about hydrogen is that if we can run our cars on hydrogen, we can stop all the anti-car nonsense. So all those funny people are sitting in the road on the M25. They can go home and perhaps insulate their own homes. But I think people should be conscious of the effect that they have on the world. I think that is a responsible attitude to take. But I think working towards a system where we have the technology that makes everybody able to lead the lives they want to lead is fundamentally important. I'm not a subscriber to hair shirt greenery.
No. Well, we're facing a big budget on the October 27th and also a spending review. What's your message to the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak? Just you and me talking now, no one's listening. Well, what would you tell him if he rang you up saying, Jake, I'm worried, I've got all this big debt coming up. Shall I raise taxes or increase borrowing? What's your advice?
I'm sure the Chancellor will come on your podcast and tell you himself. I think that would probably be better than my
we can ask
pontificating.
A big round in the Labour conference I've been at for the past few days has been the issue of trans rights, and the question which Labour politicians can't answer is a basic one: does a woman have a cervix? What's your answer to that question?
My answer to that question is that I don't particularly define people by bodily parts. I think you need to think of the whole person, the creation of God. And what has God created is a person, and that person is born male or female.
And if they're born male or female, does that stay with them all their lives, or can they change that later on?
Well, they are born in a particular way, and that is important and relevant. And it's very interesting that today the international sports authorities have said that because there remain differences in people who change from being a man to being a woman, physical differences, that they are suggesting having 3 types of competition, men, women, and an open competition, to recognise these differences. So can people have operations that change their appearance? Yes, they can. And can they then say that they are a woman or a man or whatever they want to do? Yes, because we are a tolerant society. But are there still differences that arise from birth? Yes.
So what's the answer? Does a woman have to have a cervix?
I'm not going to answer about bodily parts. I'm not an expert on bodily parts.
What's your advice to the PM next week at his party conference? Do you think he might get booed by members worried about tax rises?
PM get booed by the party conference? Of course he won't. He'll be cheered to the rafters.
Once upon a time, you wanted to be PM, didn't you?
Oh, you're going back to when I was 11 or 12.
You made a video. What's the deadline you gave yourself?
I think it's about time we had some questions from the
audience.
No,
we're getting towards that. We're nearly there. I've got my question about KFC in a minute. But before I ask that question about KFC, you did say you want to be Prime Minister by what date? 60? 70? How old were you?
I think I was looking at Ronald Reagan, who became president at 70, and I thought that was...
And you're only 35 now, aren't you, Jacob Rees-Mogg? So you're on the way.
And I'm 52.
52,
so,
yes.
Yes.
Do you want to be PM by the time you're 70?
I want the Prime Minister to carry on being Prime Minister well past my 70th birthday. It's about time we had somebody overtake Walpole's record.
What was that record again?
21 years.
Yeah, was that children or age?
Age.
Length
of time in office.
Oh, sorry, of course, yes. Now, you enjoy your job.
Yeah, I love my job.
You were with the Queen yesterday?
By Zoom, the Privy Council.
By Zoom. How is the Queen on Zoom? Does she enjoy it?
I'm not allowed to say really, because the Privy Council is private.
Jacob is president of the Privy Council, and he meets the Queen every week to ensure that she's happy. Basically, with how the country's going.
This isn't an entirely accurate reflection of the Privy Council.
Am I dumbing down? Have you started to print your general election campaign leaflets yet for the May 23 election, which you're planning quietly?
No, this is not a decision for me. The Fixed Term Parliament Act hasn't yet completed its passage through Parliament. Yes. It's still got to go through the House of Lords. When that is repealed, and that was one of the worst constitutional pieces of vandalism by the coalition. They didn't
by the Tory government?
Coalition.
Led by the Tories. I mean, this is you can't get away with this anymore. You're 10 years in power. It's a Tory government.
I'm going to get away with this. My job at that point as Lord President of the Council was held by Nicholas Clegg.
What were you on the back benches, weren't you? Telling me how rubbish this idea was, probably.
Yes, absolutely.
You were doing that.
I was. I started off voting against the coalition government by voting against the Fixed Term Parliament Act. It was always a stupid idea and didn't understand our constitution. Once that's gone, it will be back to the dissolution we knew of old.
Yes.
And the great thing about this for newspapers is that they can then speculate every single week about whether there's going to be an election, and this sells newspapers. So they are delighted that it's being appealed, not for high-minded constitutional reasons, but because it's just fun to speculate. So we will have these questions endlessly.
Of course, Jacob's father used to be editor of a newspaper, so he speaks from some knowledge here. We're with a great bunch of the future of this country in this room, in the Red Lion pub. Why should they get involved in politics, Jacob Rees-Mogg?
Why should they get involved in politics? Because I imagine they are concerned about the future of their nation. And they have been given a fantastic education. You've told me that St George's has won the prize as the best comprehensive in the country. Now, if you have been given the privilege of a fantastic education, you have teachers who are dedicated to ensuring that you do absolutely your best, don't you want to give something back to your country? You've been given that opportunity, and therefore don't you want to rise to the challenge? And don't you think somebody's got to do it, and shouldn't it therefore be somebody of your ability, rather than perhaps somebody who would do it less well? So it's as much about duty as anything. But I would also say it is stunningly interesting. You get to meet people like Christopher and get interviewed and quizzed by him. You get to meet groups of all kinds, of all ages, who have views and want to discuss things with you. It's a real privilege to be involved in politics. It's a duty, but it is also fun.
I'm going to ask the audience here, hands up if you might vote Labour in an election tomorrow. Hands up now. And hands up if you might vote Conservative. 2 people, the bulk.
Well, not many voted Labour.
I would say half the room, and the rest were basically
You're not going to vote Lib Dems, are you? Is there a Lib Dem in the room?
I didn't give the no. There isn't
no Lib Dems. That's
so I think there's a kind of a shrugging the shoulders. Why do so few young people want to be Tories? When you were filmed in this film that everyone's seen, you had your Vote Maggie badge on. I mean, you were unusual for being a Tory, weren't you, at that age?
Oh yes, even then. I mean, it would be wrong to say that in 1980-odd, every young person was a Tory, and now they're not. It's Churchill's comment about younger people being socialist.
They grow into it.
Well, once they get a mortgage, people often become conservative.
Were you bullied as a young Tory? No, because there is an issue in some universities about Tory students being bullied by other people in some quarters.
Well, I have read that, but I mean, I must have lived in a more tolerant age because people were frightfully nice to me.
I've got some quick questions for you, Jacob Rees-Mogg, before we throw the questions open to the floor. Either or, Times or Telegraph?
Oh, that's impossible.
No, you have to answer the question. It's either or.
That's absolutely impossible. My father was editor of the Times, and I have an enormous.
And he's here with the Telegraph.
I have an enormous loyalty to the Times, which is a great newspaper.
But today,
but the Telegraph probably is closer to my view of the world than the Times. So I'm afraid on this one, I'm absolutely sitting on the fence.
Trainers or Brogues?
What?
Trainers or Brogue shoes? Trainers are comfortable shoes.
Oh, are they? Yes. Oh, yes. That's very helpful.
Yes.
I think the answer is fairly obvious.
BBC or ITV?
Sky.
Milk in first or last when you make tea?
Coffee. Sorry, I'm not just deliberately being difficult.
Ronaldo or Messi?
No view. Is that association football?
Ketchup or HP sauce?
Oh, ketchup.
Bentley or Rolls-Royce?
Bentley.
McDonald's or KFC?
McDonald's.
Have you ever been to McDonald's?
Yes.
When? We hadn't been when we last spoke.
No, I have. I sometimes go during the Tory Party conference because you find you're doing lots of things and the evening wears on and you haven't had anything to eat and you get a bit peckish. And I actually quite like McDonald's.
What do you like? What do you eat?
I like a quarter pounder, but you take all the muck out because they put gherkins and things in which I don't like, and a few chips.
Do you bring a knife and fork yourself, or do you use your fingers?
Do you know, I think asparagus and hamburgers may be eaten with one's fingers.
Nigel Farage.
This is the most communist thing done by any government in my lifetime in this country.
Lionel Shriver.
Which is worse, Biden's not being in control and Biden being in control?
Charles Moore.
I think if people in general feel that their traditions, culture, history, values, etc. are under assault, they are basically right.
My name is Stephen Edgington, and if you're enjoying this podcast, you might like Off Script, a new series from The Telegraph. Provocative conversations with provocative individuals. Each episode I sit down with a world-leading commentator to unpick the ongoing culture wars. Unfiltered, unscripted, and full of free speech. Be sure to listen to Off Script in the same place you're listening to this, and make sure to follow so you don't miss an episode.
Jacob, thank you for that. Now I'm going to throw open the question to the students from St George's School, Harpenden. Are you ready to take their questions?
I'm looking forward to it.
It's the chap in the front row there with the glasses.
Hi, I'm Dominic. Climate change is a huge issue, but it's also a global issue. Apart from making speeches about Kermit the Frog, what is this government going to do to make sure that countries abroad cooperate on our vision of a carbon zero future?
I think it really is all about technology, because I think if you get the technology right, then other countries will want to adopt it because it will make them more efficient and more economically competitive. Other countries will look to the prosperity of their populations. They will want to see that they are well off. And you can't expect them to change until they can do so confident that people's living standards will improve, particularly if you're thinking of the less well-off countries in the world, who aren't necessarily in the position to make sacrifices that richer countries may feel able to make. So I think technology is everything. And as I discussed with Christopher, it's thinking about hydrogen and fusion and trying to ensure that there are clean systems of fuel that allow people to lead the lives they want to in a greener way.
But the question is also about China. Why should China carry on polluting while we get cleaner here? Why should we load up people here with taxes to pay for that when China is making the world worse?
Because China will become cleaner if the technologies are there and are working and are actually more economically efficient. It's very interesting. Matthew Ridley's written about this, and he's extremely well informed and interesting on this subject, and has pointed out that as we have worked through our uses of energy, we have become cleaner anyway. So actually switching from wood to coal was better for the environment because you still had the trees which had all been cut down to provide the wood. Moving from coal to oil was again cleaner. Moving from oil to gas was cleaner. So again and again we have got cleaner as economies have developed. If the next stage of development is via renewables to hydrogen or is nuclear fusion, which is a limitless source of fuel, I slightly worry that is like the perpetual motion machine, something we're always searching for, or the philosopher's stone but never find. Nonetheless, the researchers do seem more optimistic than they have been in recent years. If you can get that going, then other countries will adopt it because it's so economically efficient.
Next question, please.
Hello, I'm Sam. In light of the global pandemic, which has required huge amounts of cooperations within countries, do you think forming AUKUS without involving a significant number of powerful Western countries was a good idea in terms of unity?
I think AUKUS is tremendously important. I think it shows the commitment of the UK to global security, and it's a reminder of the importance of our relationship with Australia, which is a long way away from us, but a country with which we have always had the closest possible relationship. And there are different groupings. So you've got AUKUS, you've got the Quad of the US, Australia, Japan and India, you've got the Five Eyes, you've got NATO. So no, I think within a globalized world, you will also have agreements between like-minded groups of countries. I understand that the French are not pleased about this, but it's hard to see where their anger really comes from. Is it just that they're not getting the order for submarines? Is it an economic anger? What is it that is really upsetting them?
Is it Brexit? Is that an example, that deal, something we may not have done in the European Union?
Well, I think that's perfectly possible. I think our ability to look globally has been enormously enhanced by Brexit. One of the arguments I made for Brexit was it allowed us to lift our eyes from the narrow European sphere to look and act more globally. And I think that's something that has happened.
That's a case in point.
And that is a case in point.
Next question, please.
Hi, I'm Poppy, and I'd just like to ask Jacob, in light of the universal credit cuts, the Work and Pension Secretary said it was 2 hours extra work for claimants. I'd like to ask Jacob, how much would he earn working an extra 2 hours a week, considering all of your business interests outside of being an MP?
Well, I wouldn't actually earn anything extra a week if I worked an additional 2 hours, because I am, as a Cabinet Minister, salaried, and I am no longer involved in my outside business interests. So it wouldn't make any difference to me if I worked 2 hours more or 2 hours less.
Is the point right, though? The question is about whether you should ask people to work longer to cover the removal of this uplift.
Well, it was an uplift. You're right to say that. It was temporary during the pandemic. And this comes back to the question we discussed at the very beginning. Who is going to pay all these bills in the end? This is £6 billion a year that needs to be raised from somewhere. And we are normalising. So furlough is ending. The uplift in universal credit is ending. There is extra funding being given to local councils, an extra £500 million a year to help people who are in need. So there is some amelioration as this withdrawal takes place. But ultimately, the state cannot fund everything. It can only live within its means. And over the last 18 months, because of the pandemic, we have not been living within our means. We have to get back to living within our means.
Next question, please.
Hi, my name's Alistair. One really important issue for young people is mental health. And given Sir Keir Starmer's recent pledge on increasing provision for mental health support, how important do you view it as an issue, and what would you like to see done by the government?
Well, it's an area, actually, where there is a great deal of cross-party agreement, that I think everyone recognises the need for additional mental health support. The funding being provided for it is increasing rapidly, and I think that's important. But also, the government has promised a renewal of the Mental Health Act, and that will be coming forward fairly shortly, within the next year. But it's important that it is something done on a cross-party basis. I don't see there's a lot of party politics in mental health, but I think there is a recognition that it is a serious problem, particularly young people's. I think every constituency MP sees this problem in his or her postbag. I certainly do, with young people with eating disorders having to wait 2 or 3 months to get an appointment to receive any treatment. And this is really worrying because early intervention does seem to be very helpful. So the increase in funding is going to be important. The new legislative framework will be important, and it's then making sure that the money is spent in such a way that you have the resources to treat people when they need treatment.
Do you feel sorry for students, a bit older than these students at university, who have had a pretty rough time with the way they've been treated by universities, withdrawing face-to-face tuition, putting it all online, barricading them in some universities, saying they can't leave? I mean, it's a pretty dreadful time for them.
I mean, I think the pandemic has had the worst effect on the young and the old. People in the middle, people like me, with families, when you're at home, you have the company of your family. But the elderly living on their own, and students who have just left home for the first time, or young people who've just entered the workplace, have had, I think, the most difficult time of it. And it is really important to focus help on them. And with the elderly, it's giving them the confidence to get back to what they were doing 18 months ago, which, if you haven't driven in the dark for 18 months, is probably surprisingly difficult. For young people, it is trying to allow them to make up for the lost benefits that they've had of their first year at university or their last year at school. I mean, all those enjoyable things that people do in their last year of school, they have been denied. All those things that people do that are part of the broader educational experience when they go on to university have been denied for the last year, and I think that's been very tough.
And GPs won't see them. Oh. And when did you last see a GP, Jacob Rees-Mogg?
Well, I haven't seen one for ages because I am the epitome of rude good health, but this is most unsatisfactory. I mean, it was reported in your newspaper, a constituent, not only a constituent, friend of mine was in your paper because the failure of the GP to see her meant she almost died. And you did a very good expose of this in the Telegraph. And she's not the only one. I've had other constituents who've been to see their GP and been told off for going.
So what can the government do? I mean,
NHS England is independent of government, and there is little power for the politicians to give direction. Over recent decades, there's been a great tendency to hand things over to independent bodies and allow them to get on with it. I happen to think that the people who should be deciding things are the politicians who are elected and accountable. Because if you don't like what we do, you can chuck us out.
That's what Brexit is about.
That's what Brexit is about.
Bringing power back to the
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. To elected people who are accountable, and we have too much unelected quangoism that you can't change.
Well, start a bonfire then.
Oh, bonfire.
It's been going on for years,
Do you see that somewhere's going to have a virtual bonfire to be green for their bonfire night celebrations? That does seem a bit woke for me, a bit snowflakery. It is a problem. The government doesn't have the direct power of instruction, but we all ought to be getting back to work. We need to be seeing people. We need to be getting back into our offices, and GPs need to be seeing their patients. That is what they're paid for.
Next question, please.
Given the rise of billionaires in the UK by a quarter over the pandemic, how is it fair that the financial burden of the pandemic falls upon the very poorest in society in the form of a £20 a week universal credit cut?
I don't think the premise of the question is right, that the top 1% of taxpayers who paid under 10% of tax when tax rates were at 98% prior to 1979. I think it was 6% of tax was paid by the top 1%, are now paying around 30% of tax. The more billionaires you have, the more tax revenue you have, the more you can afford to do, the stronger the economy you have. The £20 was a temporary uplift to deal with the immediate problems of the shutdown, the lockdown and COVID. It was never intended to be permanent. But if we are to have an economy that affords to do the things that we want to do, can afford the health service, can afford the education services that we provide, we need to have the people who generate wealth. And the people who generate wealth will themselves become very rich. But they pay 45% tax on their income. They pay a surcharge on dividend income. So they are contributing. Indeed, they are the primary funders of the public services that we enjoy. We are as highly taxed in this country as we have been pretty much since the war, certainly since Harold Wilson was Prime Minister. The idea that there is all this extra tax to be plucked out is simply false. If we are to have a strong and growing economy, we are as taxed as highly as the country can afford. So actually, if you increase tax, you will find there is less money, partly because billionaires can just leave, and then you don't get any money from them at all, but also because taxation lowers economic growth. And it's economic growth that we need to be able to pay the benefits and for the health service and so on that as a country we want to do.
Are we as taxed as we can at the moment?
The tax rate as a percentage of GDP is as high as it's been since Harold Wilson was Prime Minister.
And it shouldn't go any higher?
I refer you to the answer I've just given.
Next question.
My name's Sophie. A significant majority of UK Prime Ministers have been educated in elite private schools such as Eton and Harrow. How can this privileged club, of which you are a part, lead this country when they have no real understanding of how to make ends meet?
Leadership of this country is the people who are elected. And actually, I think we should be very proud of our education system in this country, that we find a lot of people from overseas want to have their children educated in the UK because we provide a very high level of education. And the same is true of our world-beating universities. And this is something we should be proud of, not something we should denigrate. And I think the voters are entitled to elect whoever they want to elect. I mean, they could have voted for Jeremy Corbyn, and they decided instead to vote for Boris Johnson. That was a choice of the electorate. That's democracy in action. And I think the Prime Minister is very capable of empathising with people in different circumstances from his own. And I think empathy is a key part of the political skill that people have to have. But what I'd say to you is stand for Parliament then. You know, we were discussing this earlier. But if you think the leadership of this country is not what you want, it's up to you to do something about it.
Why don't more Prime Ministers come from state schools like St George's? Why are they drawn from a small proportion of private schools? Well, is it an issue of confidence? They feel nervous, but people, a private school, a good one, gives you confidence to push ahead and outstrip your peers? Or is it, what's happening? Why can't we get more Prime Ministers from state schools?
I think the education reforms of Michael Gove were extremely important in raising the standard of our state education in this country. And that has been a fundamental improvement and is part of what you are benefiting from. And I think this is going to be fundamental to the opportunities available in this country.
Next question.
Hi, my name's Molly. I read in an article that you moved Somerset Capital Management to Dublin, where it would be regulated by EU rules. And so my question was, how can you as a businessman be seemingly opposed to Brexit, but as an MP and supposedly acting in the best interest of your constituency, promote Brexit as a good idea?
Because unfortunately the newspaper report was fundamentally false. That I'm sorry. This is one of those things that's cropped up from time to time. Somerset Capital Management is a UK-based company with a subsidiary in Singapore, and it has been like that since it was founded by me and a couple of partners in 2007. As with many financial services companies, we have funds that are located in different jurisdictions. So we have ones in the United States, we have ones in Singapore, we have ones in Australia, and we have one in Dublin. That is a fund, it's not the basis of the company. And certainly, EU investors may prefer to have a Dublin fund than to a London fund, but the business is a UK business, UK tax-paying business, and has been since it was founded. But thank you. I'm grateful you've given me the opportunity to clarify that, because it's one of those things that has gone around, and chasing around after social media when something false is put around is almost impossible.
Just finally, Jacob Rees-Mogg, a final question or final response here to these students who've come all this way to hear to you. What's your advice to them for the future?
Well, as you're clearly very interested in politics, I would encourage you, for whichever party you are most attracted by, to get involved. The country needs to be led by capable people and clever people. And you have been given the advantage of a first-class education. Please use it in the service of your country.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, that's all for this week, listeners. Next week, I'll be bringing you a series of podcasts recorded live in front of an audience at the Conservative Party conference. And there's been quite a lot of job changes since we booked our guests. So if you have any questions for the new party co-chairman, Oliver Dowden, new culture secretary, Nadine Dorries, or new foreign secretary, Liz Truss, please do let me know. Email me, chopperspolitics@telegraph.co.uk, or find us on Twitter. We're @chopperspodcast. Thanks to my guests this week, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Most importantly of all, thank you to the politics class of St George's School, Harpenden. thank you as well to my producers, Louisa Wales, Giles Gear and Theo Luludis, as well as the team who filmed today's episode, James England, Matt Hill and Elliot Daly. But most importantly of all, thank you to you for listening. Now, for all the analysis from the Tory Party conference, as well as the backstage gossip, of course, sign up to my new newsletter, Choppers Politics. Go to telegraph.co.uk/newsletters to sign up and get my insights every lunchtime delivered straight into your email inbox. And finally, as ever, please do buy a copy of the Daily Telegraph, like Jacob Rees-Mogg does every day. You won't regret it. Until next time, though, cheerio!